Jameson will watch us. Right, buddy? Give us the thumbs up when you're ready, hon. Well, good morning, everybody. We're together for our adult forum, What Has Happened to Us in This Pandemic. We're both, some of us gathered here in person, and we're also live streaming right now, too. We may be having some from Lexington coming on with us. So how's that, everyone? Ashleigh is well known and a renowned speaker, so
I don't think that's it.
As you know, everybody, I've been saying Teten with your name, Ashleigh, because most know you. Ashleigh Teten Callahan. Jeremy, her husband, is doing the slides for her up above. She will be here at SDA this coming fall as our school psychologist in Auburn currently, but we're so excited that we get to have her share. I approached her some weeks ago because I was starting to have lots of souls reach out to me, sharing with me what they had experienced or are experiencing. Like I preached this morning, the toll that this last year has taken on us is more than we realize mentally, physically, emotionally. So I wanted Ashleigh to help us be able to normalize ourselves in such a way so we can say, yeah, we are in this together. So welcome, Ashleigh. We're so grateful to have you here. I'm going to start you with a prayer, and then we'll get you started. Gracious God, thank you so much for the ways that you have been so faithful to us, especially through this pandemic, through all that has happened. We know, Lord, in many ways you've carried us and kept us lifted up, but we also know our humanness and the reality of the weariness and the toll things have taken, not only on us, but each other and our neighbors around this world. Thank you for the gifts that Ashleigh brings to us today. Bless her in her sharing. Bless us as we're together physically and live streaming. And may you continue to help us to be witnesses to your love, your grace, your forgiveness, especially in these days. In your name we pray. Amen. Thanks, Ashleigh.
Well, first, thank you all for being here, whether you're here with me in the pews or watching the live stream or from home. I know maybe some people might be watching the recording later, so hello. I'll give you a little bit of background. Like Pastor Sarah said, she approached me a few weeks ago, and she said, I need some backup here from someone who knows something about mental health. People are really struggling, as she said. And I warned her, so I'll give you the same warning. I am a school psychologist, so I'm accustomed to dealing with little people, not big ones. But I told her, I'll do my best. So I'll tell you the same thing. I'll do my best. And the thing about mental health is it knows no age. It doesn't matter how old you are. Mental health affects everyone. So it doesn't matter if I work with little people or big people. It's a worldwide problem right now. Another disclaimer I want to share before we start is I'm not a licensed therapist, not a clinical psychologist. I'm simply just here to share some data with you, like she said, to help us kind of feel a little bit normal and feel like we're not alone in this, and hopefully cultivate some thoughtful reflection and conversations for you. So again, I'm just so glad we're all here together. I'm so thankful that Pastor Sarah saw this need and chose to accept that call and do something about it rather than just sweeping it under the rug like so many people do. You know, I've lived in the Syracuse area my entire life, with the exception of moving out to Kearney for a few years for college and grad school. And this is the best place in the world to live, and you would be hard-pressed to convince me otherwise. We have such a great community here. We have a great church, a great congregation. We have those small-town values people talk about. You hear, you know, we're hardworking, we're honest, we do the right thing. We know how to pull up our bootstraps when things get tough, right? But on the other side of the coin, sometimes pulling up our bootstraps is not the right thing to do, and it's just not going to cut it. And I think right now is one of those times. I could say a million positive things about living in rural communities like ours, but I could tell you a few things we're too good at, which I wish we weren't, which is pulling up those bootstraps, sweeping things under the rug, often avoiding things that make us feel uncomfortable. We're too good at ignoring mental health issues or pretending like they don't impact us or that we're just strong enough to deal with it, which is, I think, where a lot of people are at right now. You know, we can do it. We're okay. But I have a feeling this last year has changed some of that for us, kind of changed how we view our own mental health and our well-being. But the good thing is, you all being here today, or you all on the live stream or watching this recording later, That kind of sends a message to your families, to your friends, to the person sitting next to you in the pew, to yourself, that this is important. This is something we need to address right now. So thank you for acknowledging that and being willing to sit in these uncomfortable feelings and trying to navigate our way through this. I attended a keynote presentation the other day as part of a conference, and the keynote speaker said, right now the USA could stand for the United States of Anxiety. And I laughed and it made me giggle, and then immediately I was like, oh gosh, yikes, he's so right. And it really is the whole United States, which is really our goal today, is to let you know you're not alone. You're not the only one experiencing these things. The pandemic is not just impacting people that already had mental health conditions before. It's bringing out whole new feelings that people are not used to experiencing. So I'm going to be talking about kind of the clinical, the psychological, and the mental health perspectives of this whole pandemic. And, not just the pandemic. There have been a lot of things that have happened over the last year that have just made our world a little bit crazy. And then Pastor Sarah will follow up with what our faith can do for us in times like this. That same keynote speaker the other day said something that really stuck with me. He said, anxiety says, what if? But faith says, even if. Even though my experience is mostly on the psychological side of things, I'm a firm believer, and most psychologists are, that no amount of counseling, processing, talking with someone will be able to heal you without some kind of faith in something. So I'm thankful to have Pastor Sarah to help us through that side of things. Okay, go ahead, Jared. So before that's kind of hard to read, so we're just going to roll with it. So before we get into how we're feeling, I think it's important to address how we got here. So November 2020 was the perfect storm, and when I say perfect, I mean that in the absolute worst way possible. November was the peak of the worst of COVID. If you can see that graph at all, I think it says November 18th was the worst day of COVID in the United States, and that date still remains as the highest amount of cases. A ton of people in America, in Nebraska, and even right here in Syracuse were getting COVID in November. So this caused people, of course, to have to quarantine, so isolation and loneliness became a big factor in our lives. And I can tell you from my own personal experience that this caused a big disruption in our routine. Jeremy is running the slides, my husband, we have a 2-year-old at home. And myself and my husband caught COVID back to back, and then our 2-year-old had to quarantine for 2 weeks after that. So by the time it was all over, I had either taken leave from work or worked from home for over a month, and our 2-year-old had been home with us for over a month, out of his daycare routine, out of his whole schedule. So going back to that routine in December was difficult, because humans are creatures of habit, and isolation is not something we're accustomed to. That's not normal for us. So when I think about how challenging that transition back was for my son and me after just a month, I think about people who have been isolated since the beginning of all this in March of 2020. Some folks have been working from home for over a year. And some people have been staying home out of caution due to pre-existing health conditions or simply personal preference. The other thing about November is that we were entering a time of seasonal changes, which historically have impacted many, many people, and a lot of you can probably relate to. About 5% of the US population before the pandemic started reported having seasonal depression every year, kind of those winter blues. And many other people may not have had actual diagnosed seasonal depression, but do struggle throughout the winter. The weather's getting colder, we're not getting as much sunshine, the days are shorter. All these things impact the hormones that control our moods. So naturally, November is difficult for many people anyway, during a normal year. So during a normal year, though, we have the holidays to kind of bring us out of that, right? We have Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's all around that time, but this year many families didn't get together for the holidays. So the third factor of this perfect storm last November was the election. I won't talk much about politics or the election today. We'll kind of get into that more next week. But I do want us to recognize that the election and just the political climate overall were key players in our mental health and our overall happiness, or maybe lack thereof, throughout the winter this year. All right, Jer. So I want us to take some time to reflect on how we're feeling. This is one area where Pastor Sarah said, I really think people need to name what they're feeling so that we can feel normal and begin to relate to each other. So think about how you're feeling, maybe not right at this moment, but any given time over the last year or since the beginning of this pandemic. Have you felt anxious? Maybe anxious about all the unknowns of COVID, anxious about all these rules and regulations and recommendations that are constantly changing. Were you anxious about who would our next president be and what would that mean for our country? Have you felt exhausted? Maybe you're an essential worker and you've been working significantly more hours, or maybe you've had to work from home and that's changed your personal state of exhaustion. Maybe you were working from home and caring for children at the same time who were doing virtual learning through school, doing 2 or 3 jobs at once. Have you felt scared of getting COVID, scared of a relative getting COVID, scared of how these political changes might impact you or the people you love? Have you felt sad about things you might have missed out on because of COVID? Sad about the number of people who have died from COVID? Sad to see how much hate there is in the world right now and how terribly people are treating each other? Have you felt frustrated? Frustrated because people maybe haven't taken COVID as seriously as you think they should, or maybe you think people are taking COVID too seriously and that's frustrating for you. Frustrated that we're still in this situation after over a year. Annoyed, that's me. It's frustrating. Have you been annoyed by all the fake news and conspiracy theories that are going around that we're seeing in the media? Have you been annoyed from having to wear a mask over and over again? I think we can all relate to that one. Are you burned out? I want you to notice that exhausted and burned out are 2 separate bullet points on here. We're going to get into that a little bit, but know that burnout is a whole different feeling, a whole different level. Or maybe you felt indifferent. Maybe you're just a person that goes with the flow and you're just rolling with the punches and waiting this thing out, and eventually we'll go back to normal and you're okay with that. And have you maybe felt guilty? Guilty about the way you have acted or things you have said when emotions ran high in this political climate? Have you felt guilty that maybe you could have made better use of your time at home? Maybe you look back and think, man, I could have learned a new hobby, or I could have spent more time with my kids, or spent that time better, or maybe I could have been more productive. The most important thing to note is that no matter which of these feelings you're having, or if you're feeling something completely different than anything I've just mentioned, that these feelings aren't wrong. There is no right or wrong way to process any of this. And I feel like we have heard the phrase, we're living in unprecedented times, 1,000,000 times, but it is so true. Nobody knows how to handle this scenario. So your feelings are valid, and regardless of whether you or anybody else thinks they're right or wrong, they are valid. And maybe you're still having trouble identifying exactly what you are feeling, and that's okay too. So hopefully you leave here today with some strategies to start identifying those feelings so we can start to move forward. One of the things Pastor Sarah mentioned when she asked me to give this presentation is that she felt that people felt alone. So I'm here to tell you that you are not. Go ahead, Jer. I'm going to share some statistics from a study that the CDC conducted. And some of these numbers might scare you or make your heart hurt, make your tummy hurt a little bit, make you sad. But I hope they'll help you see that if you're struggling, you are far from alone. I do want to say to anyone here and anyone that may be watching live or recording, we will be discussing substance abuse and suicide. So if you need to take care of yourself in any way during those portions, please do that. Okay, Jared, go ahead. So the CDC kind of put together a bunch of statistics trying to compare what were people like before COVID and what are they like after. I think it's probably pretty hard to read those percentages, so I'll try to help you understand what they say. So they surveyed people from January to June 2019, so way before COVID ever even was talked about or existed. And then they surveyed them again in January 2021, so just a couple months ago. This is the percentage of adults reporting anxiety or depression. Pre-COVID was 11%. Post-COVID, 41%. Okay, next one. This is adults reporting anxiety or depression by age. So as you can see, the younger generation is struggling the most with this. Ages 18 to 24 was 56%. Over half of young adults are struggling with anxiety or depression. Ages 25 to 49 was also almost 50%. 50 to 64 was 39%, and folks 65 and older was 29%. So as I said before, mental health knows no age. Yes, there may be some variance, but really it's impacting people across the board. Okay, next one. This is adults reporting anxiety or depression by household job loss. So people that have lost a job due to COVID, 53% of them are reporting anxiety or depression. And even the people that haven't had a job change, their work and their finances haven't been impacted by this, still 31% are reporting anxiety or depression. Next one. So this is people who have said that worry or stress related to COVID has had some kind of negative impact on their mental health. So the dark blue is they reported a major negative impact, and the light blue is a minor negative. So I'll just kind of report the overall numbers because that's what I looked at mostly. So this is by household income. So a household income of less than 40,000, 56 people reported they had been negatively affected. 40 to 89,000 was 51%, and over 90,000 was 48%. So, historically, people in poverty have been impacted by these things more than others, but here we're seeing it doesn't really matter. Even those household incomes on the higher end, still 48% of people are saying they have been negatively impacted by COVID. This is a good one for all the moms out there. The number of adults with children under 18 who report anxiety or depression. Women, so moms of kids under 18, 49%. We are natural worriers. We worry about our kids from the minute we wake up to the minute we go to bed. So that didn't surprise me at all. And even the men were at 40%. The next one talks about essential and non-essential workers. So the essential workers are in the dark blue, and the non-essential workers are in the light blue. These were the ones that were very staggering to me and kind of made my stomach hurt when I read them. So just overall, the percentage of essential workers that reported anxiety or depression was 42%, and non-essential workers was 30%. The next, the bars in the middle is people who said that they started or increased substance abuse to be able to cope with the stress of COVID. Essential workers, 25%, non-essential, 11%. And the last one, percent of workers who have seriously considered suicide in the past 30 days. Essential workers, 22%. 1 in 5 nurses 1 in 5 doctors 1 in 5 grocery store workers have seriously considered suicide in the past 30 days. That still gives me chills thinking about it now. And even the non-essential workers are still at 8%. That's incredibly high. So I hope those statistics, like I said, they're kind of scary. They make my tummy hurt. They make me sad. But know that you're not alone. There's people feeling really big feelings because of COVID. So go ahead and go on to the next one. Let's talk about burnout. Like I said before, burnout is not just being tired or even being exhausted. It's much more serious, and it requires us to be much more intentional about our coping strategies. So what exactly is burnout then, if it's not just being tired and exhausted? It has 3 components, so it's the physical and emotional exhaustion. So not just feeling tired at the end of the workday, but being emotionally spent as well. For many people, especially those essential workers, compassion fatigue is huge here. We spend our entire day caring for others. Carrie, you're a teacher. You spend your entire day taking care of other people's kids, taking care of other people than yourself, and at the end of the day, you have nothing left for yourself, let alone your families or your children. The second factor of burnout is cynicism, so those negative feelings towards people, places, or events. I have caught myself so many times saying, I'm so done with this, I'm so over COVID, this is all stupid, having those cynical thoughts. So cynicism among essential workers right now might sound something like, I hate my job, I don't want to do this anymore, I don't need this job. And then the third element is self-blame. So saying, what's wrong with me? Why am I not strong enough to just deal with this? I shouldn't feel this anxious or this frustrated or fill in the blank with any emotion. If these 3 things sound like something you've been experiencing, recognize that you are burned out. So what can we do about burnout? Go ahead, Jeremy. The first thing is to take stock in your mood very often. I'm talking like every hour on the hour for a few days if you need to. So maybe you have a journal where you write down a few words to describe how you're feeling several times a day. Maybe you just have a note in your phone that you type a few things in of how certain things made you feel or how you felt at a certain time of the day. Or maybe you're not a journal type person at all and you just need to set an alarm every hour to remind yourself to mentally reflect on how you're feeling. Try to start noticing any trends and patterns with how you're feeling, and this is the part that might get a little uncomfortable. So if you start to notice that every time you call your mom or your sister or your friend, you noted that your mood was better, that's a great idea. That's something that needs to be in your toolbox of coping strategies. If you start to notice that every time you have a conversation with so-and-so, your mood gets worse, That's great data to have as well. Now we know that's a boundary we probably need to work on. And the next one, this is going to be hard for a lot of people, including me. If you start to notice that if you, at the times of day you're scrolling social media, your mood is worse, that's great data to have, and that's something we need to work on. Maybe we need to reduce our screen time. So try to be intentional about picking up on those patterns, kind of those trends over the next week. And then next week when we meet again, we'll dive into what to do with those feelings and the patterns and how to set those boundaries. And the other thing I want to challenge you to do is to name the exact feelings you're experiencing over the next week, which seems to be kind of something we're all struggling with. So this part may take some time, especially if these feelings are not typical for you. This is not something you experienced prior to the pandemic, so we're not really sure what to call it. I was probably well into my 20s when I finally figured out that I have anxiety. When really thinking back, I probably started experiencing it very young, and my mom's probably like, yeah, you were a nervous little wreck sometimes. I had just never called it that, and no one had ever called it that to me. No one had ever said, this is what you're experiencing. But since being able to name that feeling for myself, I've been able to learn more about myself by reading about anxiety, talking to other people who have anxiety, and learning healthy ways to cope with anxiety. And I've even learned to use it in positive ways. So if you find that you're struggling to name the exact feeling you're having, start by talking about how it makes your body feel. Again, I work with little people, and this is an exercise we do all the time, but I think it would work with adults too. I give them this piece of paper with an outline of a body. Nothing's on it, just an outline of a body. And I give them a bunch of markers and say, just show me what you're feeling on that paper. So some kids draw a mess of squiggly lines right around the stomach and say their tummy feels funny when it's time to take a test. Well, they're experiencing nervousness or anxiety. Some kids grab the red marker and just start pounding it on the head area of the diagram and tell me that when people pick on them or when something makes them mad, it feels like their head's on fire. Now, obviously, adults will look and sound much differently than the kids will, but you might identify things like, my chest feels tight when I think about this, or my stomach hurts when I think about this, or when I talk to this person, or maybe I get a headache and get dizzy. And so that will help to leading to being able to name some of those emotions. So the last plug I'm going to put in for the day is to seek help from a professional if you're feeling like this is too much to manage on your own. Or maybe you're having trouble naming those feelings and identifying exactly what's going on. There is absolutely no shame in seeing a therapist or a professional who can help you more. Now more than ever, we are in a time where seeing a therapist for mental health needs or emotional needs has to be just as important as going to the ER for stitches or if you have an injury. Much like a deep cut won't heal properly without stitches, you're going to have a nasty scar. We cannot heal ourselves, our hearts and our minds from what we've been through this past year without the proper treatment. And for some, that's going to mean a therapist. And for some people, it's going to mean that they can just reflect and kind of get through things by themselves or with people that they trust to talk to. So I hope you leave today with a couple of action steps to help identify what feelings you're having. And then next week, we'll dive into what we do once we know what those feelings are. We are going to talk a little bit about self-care. And I'm not just talking like a bubble bath. That's not going to cut it anymore for what we're going through. We're going to talk about deeper levels of self-care. We're going to talk about setting boundaries. This is one that's going to be hard and uncomfortable. We have got to learn to set boundaries with ourselves, with our phones, and maybe with people, and that can be hard. And we're going to talk about how to give grace to ourselves and to others, because that's what we all need more than anything right now is just a little bit of grace. It's been a hard year. And we will get into the political climate a little bit. We'll talk about cancel culture and all those fun things we're hearing in the media, other hot topics in today's world. So I'm going to let Pastor Sarah do some reflecting and sharing to kind of connect the things I just said. And I hope to see you all here back next week, and we can kind of continue this conversation. Jeremy, if you want to go to the next slide, I do have that's my personal cell phone number on there and my email. So if you have any questions, I can't promise that I'll be able to answer them. If you just want to have a conversation, reach out. Or maybe you, after hearing what I said today, you're like, I think it's time for me to take that next step. I'm happy to help you reach out if finding a therapist is not something that you're familiar with or comfortable with. I'm happy to help with all of those things. That's what I do for a living, is just connect people with what they need. So thank you.
Thank you, Ashleigh. It's such a joy to get to partner with Ashleigh in this as we're having conversation about what truly has happened to us. I love our community just like Ashleigh, but we are a German community. And I know that means that we don't talk about these things a whole lot. And I've always come to learn, because my Belfridge, my mom's side of the family, is all German, so that's why I get it. We don't put these things out there because they makes us anxious to talk about why we're anxious. But I came to figure out very quickly, everyone, in two ways with our congregation, how you had changed through this year. The first one was when we started opening up, it wasn't this immediate we were back to ourselves reaction. It was a very hesitant action, and it was one very telling of how we are, just as you listed all those emotions, so much different anxiety, worry, and even in the different ways that we were worshiping, how that was living out. And then the second way I noticed that was just in speaking with several of you, or even as I observe and watch on social media as well too, those feelings that we were having. So I commend Ashleigh to help us begin this conversation and to talk with each other. And also, not only because of needing for ourselves, but for each other. I think of how the example of our bathhouse is such an incredible example right now of how our community works together for the good of each other, how all those funds, here we are at the very end, getting the last oomph in the money of the build the house for the bathhouse. But I know that those same ways, you've said, Ashleigh, that we can't just pull ourselves up on this. We need a different tool set because none of us have lived through a pandemic before. I myself, and our bishop commends all of us who are rostered leaders, so it'd be like Nick, a deacon, or me as a pastor, that we are to work with spiritual directors. And they're the ones to help us observe and ask those inward questions about what we're going through as well. So that's what I hope that Ashleigh and I can help be with, that she can help plug you in those directions. And I can also help give you some tools that my spiritual director has given me. First couple of things I want to say before I share those tools, everyone, is that remember, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. One of the number one things that has gotten me through this is understanding that this church went through a pandemic 100 years ago. And look how we are today and all the gifts we have. This church is going to make it through this pandemic too. And it may not be right back the way we want it in a year or two, and it's going to take a lot of patience. But I think about how Christ got our church through this. When they were 2 years old, Christ got our church through this pandemic. And I think about each of us individually that God got them through it. God's going to get us through it now. And that I preach very blatantly this morning about how Christ is the physical presence that comes to us with an approach of grace. We are the body of Christ, the physical presence that are called to come with an approach of grace. It's the only way we can take care of each other right now, because that cynicism and burnout, we're projecting that, and it's easy to do that right now. So that grace may be offering forgiveness to somebody who projected to you and just saying, I know this isn't about me, but I know that it's about that misprojected struggle you're having. And so by naming those feelings, we are actually getting to feel a normalizing. Like when I was a young mom and I would feel like I just wrecked it and I was the worst mom on the planet, I'd have this wonderful group of moms I got together with. We actually called ourselves the Margarita Mamas on Friday afternoon, and we would share how we were doing our parenting. And as soon as they would share, oh my gosh, I just yelled at my kids for da-da-da-da-da-da, and I would go, oh, it's not just me. That's the feeling that I pray that you have as we give permission to each other to talk about it, that we go, oh, it's not just me. You felt that too through this pandemic. So that would be the second piece of remembering we're in this together, called together for a reason, and God's got us in this church together for each other. So lean on each other for that. The two exercises I want to commend to you, everybody. There's one for just when we can't control anything and we feel so inept to even approach it. It's called the Jesus Prayer, and this is all it is. So repeat after me. Jesus, Jesus, I trust you. I trust you. That's all this Jesus Prayer is. What I commend you to use it for is if you're a news watcher like I am, or if you're someone who has to be under maybe some type of authority, or there's a particular situation in your life or your family, you have no control to make any changes, I commend the Jesus Prayer to you. I often, everybody, walk in a circle around our sanctuary many times in the week. I'm trying to get Fitbit steps, but I also use it as my prayer time where I just walk around and around. And when I think about like our political climate, or I think about something that I can't make a change in, and that's causing me to start to feel very anxious and frustrated and angry, all I do is go, Jesus, I trust you. And I walk a few more pews. Jesus, I trust you. And it becomes this mantra that actually then counters some of those negatives that you continue to feel, or it counters that sense of helplessness that you feel because you're leaning into your faith, and in many ways you're putting a new recording into your head. The second one, everyone, that we are going to do this morning is called the Welcome Prayer. And when my spiritual director did this with me the first time, it was the first time that I felt permission to hold on to a feeling that I perceived as negative. So if I was feeling very cynical, I've always been taught that when you feel something like that you perceive it as negative, you need to get it out of you. And you don't do anything of processing, just get it out of you. But this prayer is called the Welcome Prayer, because when you have that feeling, you stop and you visualize and you hold that feeling inside of you. You welcome it inside of you, and you just sit with it. And as you sit with it, you can pray, praying, saying, Christ, I am feeling so mad, and I feel mad because, and I don't know what to do with this mad feeling right now. I welcome it. And then the second part of the prayer is you release it. And a lot of spiritual practices have to do with our breath. So when we release it, it's a and you let it out. You welcomed it, you acknowledged it, you were real with it, you named it, you let the Lord be with you in it, and then so let's do a welcome prayer before we head out today, everyone. God, we come to you wherever and however we are. As we come before you, we name what feeling or feelings of which we wrestle. Lord, today I name before you the feeling of. I welcome this feeling and I hold it. I hold it in this space inside of me with you with me. I ask this feeling, why? Why is it here? I honor this feeling. I ask, what am I to learn of it? As I sit with this feeling, Lord, I ask you to sit with me as I am. Taking this feeling, Lord, I now release it as I breathe out deeply. Hold it for me, God. Lead me forward in this day. In your name we pray. Amen. So as Ashleigh challenged us with naming feelings in this week, then I commend you to take those two with you too, the Jesus prayer, Jesus, I trust you. When we know we can't do anything about it, Jesus, I trust you. Jesus, I trust you. And for me, I commend you to bring it with a physical action like a walking, or I think of you, Shirley, with your sewing, something that you do repetitively so that it becomes a repeated mantra in your head. And then I ask you in the next week to do that welcome prayer. Acknowledge that feeling. And I'll tell you something, it's going to come back. That feeling will. And welcome it again. And then release it and ask God to hold it for you. So thank you, Ashleigh. Thank you, everybody. Thank you online and those watching recording later. We'll see you next week as we continue on. Blessings.